Public Opinion, Chapter 9. Hopefully I can breeze through a few chapters in one sitting here. Expertness in any subject is, in fact, a multiplication of the number of aspects we are prepared to discover, plus the habit of discounting our expectations, where to the ignoramus all things look alike, and life is just one thing after another. To the specialist, things are highly individual. For a chauffeur, a connoisseur, a member of the president's cabinet, or a professor's wife, there are evident distinctions and qualities, not at all evident to the casual person who discusses automobiles, wines, old masters, Republicans, and college faculties. Those who are expert are so on only a few topics. Even among the expert soldiers, expert cavalrymen were not necessarily brilliant with trench warfare and tanks. Indeed, sometimes a little expertness on a small topic may simply exaggerate our normal human habit of trying to squeeze into our stereotypes all that can be squeezed, and of casting into outer darkness that which does not fit. So, whatever we recognize as familiar, we tend, if we are not very careful, to visualize with the aid of images already in our mind. Thus, in the American view of progress and success, there is a definite picture of human nature and of society. So, just quickly, briefly, point being that expertness requires a kind of specialized focus on something, right? And with that comes limitations. So, for example, this is maybe the multidisciplinary athlete, or the multi-sport athlete argument, right? Which is not great comparison, but the point being, like, if you only played hockey year-round, you'll be very specialized in hockey. You might progress significantly in that period of time compared to others. But at the same time, you will be less, that won't translate as well to another sport like golf or baseball, whatever. And so the specializing of hockey necessarily requires that you're less of an expert in another sport than you might have otherwise been if you'd split that 50-50, right? Or better translation being, you're an expert at hockey, but that doesn't make you an expert at sport. And so that's not necessarily going to translate to even a similar thing, like another sport. And so one of the things that I think about is, like, with this new presidential administration coming in and the formation of Doge, headed by Elon, right? He might be an expert in business, but is that going to translate to government efficiency? He might be an expert in business efficiency, but is that even the same thing as government efficiency? So, it supplied a standard version of capitalist, promoter, worker, and consumer. Well, ooh, yeah, I do have to do this. So these qualities were standardized rather innocently by older economists. So back to the previous quote. Whatever we recognize as familiar, we tend, blah, blah, blah. It is the kind of human nature and the kind of society which logically produce the kind of progress that is regarded as ideal. And then when we seek to describe or explain actually successful men and events that have really happened, we read back into them the qualities that are presupposed in the stereotypes. These qualities were standardized rather innocently by older economists. They set out to describe the social system under which they lived and found it too complicated for words, so they constructed what they sincerely hoped was a simplified diagram, not so different in principle from the child's drawing of a complicated cow. So they're describing the early economists creating sort of the idea of capitalism, and it supplied a standard version of capitalist, promoter, worker, and consumer in a society that was naturally more bent on achieving success than on explaining it. So the buildings which rose and the bank accounts which accumulated were evidence that the stereotype of how the thing had been done was accurate. And so the idea here being they were observing the things around them, right? And this is done so often today, is people are observing these events and then forming a crude picture of what's going on. And so much like the early capitalists drawing out those crude graphs of success in capitalism, right? They determined that capitalism is based on these things, and this is how you measure success in capitalism. And so they then said, okay, well, people are getting richer, so the system is working, right? We're advancing this company, so the system is working, capitalism is working. But nobody stopped to ask if the thing that they were doing was accurate. Is that the accurate measure of success? Right? Like, is that relationship something that we want to place the value on? And so no one, says William James, sees further into a generalization than his own knowledge of detail extends. And so it's not until you've been fucked by the system that you're like, whoa, we super generalized the ideas here. And so the vanquished, instead of insisted upon the wastes and brutalities of the trusts and called loudly upon the Department of Justice to free business from conspiracies. In the same situation, one side saw progress, economy, and a splendid development. The other, reaction, extravagance, and a restraint of trade. Volumes of statistics, anecdotes about the real truth and the inside truth, the deeper and larger truth, were published to prove both sides of the argument. For when a system of stereotypes is well fixed, our attention is called to those facts which support it and diverted from those which contradict. And so one of the things here being, like capitalism, right? When the people who are fucked by this realize the flaws of this system, they start to hoot and holler for advocating for alternative solutions. But the people who are benefiting from that system dig their heels in, so they go and look for supports. But they're making their supports off of assumptions, right? And so they can manipulate this data in any way that they want, because they're not going back to the fundamental, question of whether the thing is operating as it should be, right? And so at best they say, well, this isn't a perfect thing, but there is no perfect thing. And so the reason why this is the best option is because it provides the opportunity to have that, to have the success. Yeah, some people are going to get fucked by this, but it'll balance out in the end. So that's kind of a good, like, an example of a progression in the thinking here, in the justification of something that benefits few. The problem with this, and sort of the argument made today in kind of social issues in woke culture, is like, it isn't until you experience the backlash that you will in turn, you join it. So one by one, this group of people who are early adopters only because they experienced the backlash early on, right? Or they towed the line that's now moving too closely early on. It isn't like more and more people will come to experience that and turn over until the majority takes over in feeling the same way, or having the perspective, the shared perspective. So then this gets into a lot of kind of moral dilemmas and those questions where there's a ton of gray area, and how there are some very obvious ones, but the more kind of insidious ones are the more hidden, strange, abstract ones. So he is told not to kill, but if his children are attacked, may he kill to stop a killing? The 10 Commandments are silent on the point. Therefore, around every code there is a cloud of interpreters who deduce more specific cases. So killing in self-defense, right? So then, suppose then that doctors of the law decide that he may kill in self-defense. For the next man, the doubt is almost as great. How does he know that he is defining self-defense correctly, or that he has not misjudged the facts, imagined the attack, and is really the aggressor? Perhaps he provoked the attack. But what is provocation? Exactly these confusions infected the minds of most Germans in August 1914. Interesting, I didn't think about this originally, but sometimes I think that Trump came in with this agenda to break the system by acknowledging this point in liberal theory, which is a lot of liberal assumptions are made on these gray area points, and with each one comes a new circumstance where it's like, well, what's the thing? And it sort of keeps pushing it until you've reached a definite moral problem. And so like Trump with tax evasion or something like that, exploiting the gray area becomes so accessible that, like, if the opportunity is there, people are going to take it. It's going to happen. So I don't know, sometimes I think like he does this on purpose to show all of the areas where we have these gray areas. And like the fucked up thing would be that a reactive tendency to that is going to mean super strict regulation. Like Yeah. Thus, the rule that you should do unto others as you would have them do unto you rests on the belief that human nature is uniform. Mr. Bernard Shaw's statement that you should not do unto others what you would have them do unto you, because their tastes may be different, rests on the belief that human nature is not uniform. The maxim that competition is the life of trade consists of a whole tome of assumptions about economic motives, industrial relations, and the working of a particular commercial system. The claim that America will never have a merchant marine. So I love that, though, on the do unto others as you would do. That was a huge perspective change for me, honestly, because and it broke way more wide open this very individual experience that people are having. Some people, the do unto others is an eye for an eye. Some people would rather fist fight, physical aggression to work things out. Some people want to yell, others want to be quiet. Like, if you're operating on the assumption that everybody else thinks like you or ought to think like you, that's just that's not acknowledging human nature. I have like a on a positive note for this, though, is like you can choose to sort of say, be the agent of goodness and say, I don't care if there are people who are going to take advantage of this. I think that this is the right way to live. And so this is how I'm going to operate. However, but again, everybody's thinking about that with their own nuances. Interesting. The dogmatist, using a myth, believes himself to share part of the insight of omniscience, though he lacks the criteria by which to tell the truth from error. So this is huge because, like, we're talking about moral codes, but in the codes that are under the influence of science, the conception is known to be a hypothesis, whereas in the codes that come unexamined from the past or bubble up from the caverns of the mind, the conception is not taken as hypothesis demanding proof or contradiction, but as a fiction accepted without question. In the one case, man is humble about his beliefs because he knows they are tentative and incomplete. In the other, he is dogmatic because his belief is a complete myth. The moralist who submits to the scientific discipline knows that though he does not know everything, he is in the way of knowing something. The dogmatist, using a myth, believes himself to share part of the insight of omniscience. So this is what, like, I think about. This is the inherited mindset, beliefs, right? Religion is a lot like this, that those followers, and part of the danger of religion, organized religion, is that the followers, dogmatic in their belief, believe themselves to hold this omnipotent knowledge, right? Like cults exploit that very clearly. And so they believe that they hold this knowledge that just doesn't need to be questioned. Like, that is the truth. And so even if it's a myth, they believe it to be true, so they've never questioned it. They don't feel the need to. That's dangerous. And so there's the battle, like this moralist, the scientific aspect, right? They know they don't know everything, but they're on to they know something, right? Whereas these dogmatic believers don't know anything actually, but believe that they know everything. Compare, for example, the economic and patriotic codes. There is a war supposed to affect all alike. Two men are partners in business. One enlists, the other takes a war contract. The soldier sacrifices everything, perhaps even his life. He is paid $1 a day, and no one believes that you could make a better soldier out of him by any form of economic incentive. That motive disappears out of his human nature. The contractor sacrifices very little, is paid a handsome profit over costs, and few say or believe that he would produce the munitions if there were no economic incentive. That may be unfair to him. The point is that the accepted patriotic code assumes one kind of human nature, the commercial code another, and the codes are probably founded on true expectations to this extent that when a man adopts a certain code, he tends to exhibit the kind of human nature which the code demands. What he's highlighting here is how subjective our codes are. And so in the US, like, this economic code, this pursuit of money, right, and progress through the accumulation of money, in a sense, is that ideal, that code is completely thrown out the window when in times of war people need to enlist. And then the motive of man, of human nature, is completely different in that circumstance. And you could say circumstantial things, but how about you say circumstantially, we have an environmental catastrophe. Shouldn't we have an environmental catastrophe. Why can't we apply that same code exchange for that and pursue whatever? That is one reason why it is so dangerous to generalize about human nature. A loving father can be a sour boss, right? That is where codes enter so subtly and so pervasively into the making of public opinion. The theory I am suggesting is that in the present state of education, a public opinion is primarily a moralized and codified version of the facts. I am arguing that the pattern of stereotypes at the center of our codes largely determines what group of facts we shall see and in what light we shall see them. That is why, with the best will in the world, the news policy of a journal tends to support its editorial policy. Why a capitalist sees one set of facts and a certain aspects of human nature literally sees them. His socialist opponent another set and other aspects, and why each regards the other as unreasonable or perverse, when the real difference between them is a difference of perception. The opponent has always to be explained, and the last explanation that we ever look for is that he sees a different set of facts. Such an explanation we avoid because it saps the very foundation of our own assurance that we have seen life steadily and seen it whole. Without that, whatever. For while men are willing to admit that there are two sides to a question, they do not believe that there are two sides to what they regard as a fact. So this has been very interesting and a huge development since the writing of this book. The introduction of the internet and social media has probably changed this dynamic, and people are coming to realize that quite literally we're in different universes. We're experiencing the world completely differently and seeing things and interpreting things differently. Yeah.